Hello my geniuses, welcome to another anatomy lecture series today. It's a great science tutor Lorenzo and we'll be talking about mediastinum today. So the mediastinum is a potential space, very important because it houses the great vessels and the heart and so many stuff that is very important in the thorax. So we'll be doing it today, and if you have not subscribed to my video, make sure to subscribe and turn on your post notification button so that anytime I drop any video you'll be sure to be notified. And if you want me to make any video for you, just drop it down in the comment section. When I go to it, I'll make that video for you. So let us jump right into the video. So first of all, we'll start with introducing what the mediastinum is. Just like the Latin name, it's called medius septum. Mediastinum, medius septum. So it is a median septum of the thoracic cavity in between the pleural cavity, and the pleural cavity is housing the lungs. So basically, the lungs is covered by a cavity called the pleural cavity, and this pleural cavity houses the lungs for external structures or threat or trauma. So then this pleural cavity, since we have two lungs, we have two pleural cavity, and the center of the pleural cavity is called the mediastinum, and the part of the pleural cavity that is covering the mediastinum is called the mediastinal pleura. So we have two pleural cavity, and this pleural cavity is separated from themselves, having what we call the mediastinal pleura. And in this mediastinum is basically, it has so many structures in it. So all major structures that are apart from the lungs, because the lungs is on either side of the thoracic cavity. So the center of this lungs is what we call the mediastinum, and in the center we have so many structures. The structures include, you have the heart and its great vessel, you have the thoracic part of the esophagus, you have the thoracic part of the trachea, you also have the principal bronchi, you also have the aorta, you have mediastinal lymph node, and so on. And basically, this mediastinum occupies the central compartment of the thoracic cavity. So it's at the central part of the thoracic cavity. So the thoracic cavity is a big cavity which has a thoracic inlet from the root of the neck, and you have the thoracic outlet from the diaphragm. So the central part of this thoracic cavity is the mediastinum, placed in between the pleural cavity. Don't forget it. So next we'll be talking about is the boundaries of the mediastinum. I've introduced the mediastinum to you, so basically you should have a mental picture of what a mediastinum is now. You should have a mental picture of it. So next is the boundaries. Anteriorly, it is bounded by the sternum. So go watch my videos under the bones of the thoracic cavity. So it is bounded by the sternum in front. The sternum is where all the whole ribs are attached to in front. So the next one at the back is bounded by the thoracic vertebrate. So the thoracic vertebrate, which is 12 in number. So both the body and the intervertebral discs of the thoracic vertebrate in back. So the sternum at the front, the thoracic vertebrate at the back. So superiorly is the superior thoracic aperture. The superior thoracic aperture marks the superior thoracic inlet from the root of the neck, which I discussed earlier. Now inferiorly, the diaphragm. So the diaphragm marks the closure of the inferior thoracic outlet, which separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. So next one is by the side. By the side is the mediastinal pleura. So the mediastinal pleura basically is just an extension of the pleura covering the lungs. So I told you that the pleural cavity separates the two lungs, and in the middle of the pleural cavity is the mediastinum. So the pleura covering the lungs has different parts. So go watch my video on the pleura. So when you watch the video on the pleura, you know that part of the pleura is the mediastinal pleura, which is an extension of the pleura covering the lungs, and that is where the mediastinum is bounded by its side. Don't forget. The next are the major content in the mediastinum. So what is contained in the mediastinum? What are all the structures you can find in the mediastinum? So the first one is the thalamus. The thalamus is the first one. The next one is the heart, which is enclosed in the pericardium. So inside the pericardium sac, you can find the heart. The next is the major arteries. The major arteries include the aorta. The aorta coming from the left ventricle. You also have the pulmonary trunk entering the two lungs, and you also have the trachea. The trachea is also there. You also have the esophagus, like we discussed before. You also have the thoracic duct. The thoracic duct. Oh, you also have the neural structures. What are the neural structures? You have the sympathetic, you have the phrenic, you have a lot of neural structures that are also there. And lastly, you also have the lymph nodes. So you can see it in the pictures that I'm showing you now. So these are the structures basically you can find in the mediastinum. But all the structures can be found in different parts of the mediastinum. So the mediastinum has divisions, where where all these structures can be found in separately. So that's what we'll be discussing next. Next is the division of the mediastinum. Like I said, the mediastinum is just like a compartment, but it is divided into two parts. So we have the superior mediastinum and you have the inferior mediastinum. So the superior mediastinum is up while the inferior mediastinum is down, but they are divided by what we call an imaginary line called the transverse thoracic line. So the transverse thoracic line is coming from where? It's coming from the mandibulosternal joint. So where is the mandibulosternal joint? In front, the mandibulosternal joint is in between the manubrium and the body of the sternum. So that joint that is joining the manubrium and the body is called the angle of Lewis. The angle of Lewis, or you call it the sternal angle. So like I said, go watch my video on the bones of the thoracic cavity. Now the line is coming from this angle down to the intervertebral disc between T4 and T5. The intervertebral disc between T4 and T5. So I'm repeating it again so that you will get to keep it in your memory and don't forget. So that transverse thoracic line coming from this sternal angle to the intervertebral disc between T4 and T5 divides the mediastinum into the superior part and an inferior part. Now, don't forget now. And the inferior part now can also be subdivided into three. The inferior mediastinum can be subdivided into three. So you have the anterior mediastinum, you have the middle mediastinum, and you have the posterior mediastinum. So first of all, the transverse thoracic line divides the mediastinum into superior and inferior. While subdividedly, again, the inferior mediastinum can also further be divided into what? The anterior, middle, and posterior mediastinum. You can see it on your screen. Yeah, so when you look at it, also carry your atlas and continue reading it more so that you will know what. So picking the first one, which is the superior mediastinum, because like I said, the transverse thoracic line separates the superior and inferior mediastinum, which is the first two parts of the mediastinum. Then the inferior mediastinum is further divided into the anterior, middle, and posterior mediastinum. So picking first one, the superior mediastinum, we want to talk about the boundaries and the content of the superior mediastinum. So first of all, what is the boundaries of the superior mediastinum? The boundaries of the superior mediastinum superiorly, which is the superior thoracic aperture or the superior thoracic inlet. Now inferiorly, it is the transverse thoracic line joining the angle of Lewis to the intervertebral disc between T4 and T5 inferiorly. So superiorly, superior thoracic aperture, inferiorly, transverse thoracic line. Anteriorly is the manubrium of the sternum. The manubrium of the sternum. So the manubrium of the sternum is a part of the sternum because the sternum is divided into what? Manubrium, body, and xiphoid. So go watch my video on the bone of the thoracic cavity. Now posteriorly, what is bounded? So posteriorly, it is bounded by the upper four thoracic vertebrae, the upper four thoracic vertebrae, and its intervening intervertebral disc. So the upper four thoracic vertebrae is what bounding the posterior part of the superior mediastinum. And lastly, by the side of the superior mediastinum is the mediastinal pleura. By the side, I told you the mediastinal pleura is an extension of the pleura covering the lungs. So the last one, which is the content of the superior mediastinum. So what can we find in the superior mediastinum? So the superior mediastinum only contains the nerves and great vessels. The nerves and great vessels. So the first one, we're starting with the arteries. So the arteries we'll be talking about first of all is the arc of the aorta. So the arc of the aorta with its branches. So what is the branches of the arc of the aorta? You have the brachiocephalic trunk, you have the left common carotid artery, and you have the left subclavian artery. So you have the arc of the aorta, you have the brachiocephalic trunk, you have the left common carotid artery, and you have the left subclavian artery. For the veins, what veins can you find? You can find the right and left brachiocephalic vein, the upper half of the superior vena cava, you have the left superior intercostal vein. So for the nerve, we have the right and left phrenic nerve, we have the right left vagus nerve, we have the sympathetic trunk with the cardiac plexus, we also have the left recurrent laryngeal nerve. Again, for the nerve, we have the right and left phrenic nerve, we have the right and left vagus nerve, we have the sympathetic trunk with the cardiac plexus, and we have the left recurrent laryngeal nerve. Now for the lymphatic organ and the lymphatics, what do we have? We have the lymph nodes, we have the thoracic duct, we have the thymus. Basically, we have the lymph nodes, we have the thoracic duct, we have the thymus. These are part of the lymphatic parts of the content of the superior mediastinum. So we also have for tubes. What tubes can we see there? We have the esophagus and we have the trachea. Now the last one is for muscles. So what muscles can we see in the superior mediastinum basically? So we can see the senohyoid muscle, we can see the senotrioid muscle. So these two muscles are we call them the infrahyoid muscle, the senohyoid and senotrioid. And you can also see the longissimus coli, the longissimus coli. So three muscles you can see in the superior mediastinum. You can see the senohyoid, you can see the senotrioid, and you can see the longissimus coli. Don't forget. So next we'll be talking about the inferior mediastinum. We have talked about the superior mediastinum already. Now, what is the boundaries of the inferior mediastinum? The boundaries of the inferior mediastinum, superiorly now, the inferior mediastinum is bounded by the transverse thoracic line, like I said. The transverse thoracic line is joining the angle of Lewis, which is the mandibulosternal joint, to the intervertebral disc between T4, T5. Why now? Anteriorly, it is bounded by the body of the sternum. Anteriorly is by the body of the sternum. Posteriorly is the from T5 downwards. So you have T5, T6. While from T4 upwards, posterior boundary of the superior mediastinum. While below T5 is the posterior boundary of the inferior mediastinum. While inferiorly it is bounded by the diaphragm. Also by the side, it is bounded by the mediastinal pleura. Don't forget. So going into the inferior mediastinum, I told you the inferior mediastinum is subdivided into what? You have the anterior, we have the middle, we have the posterior mediastinum. We have the anterior, we have the middle, we have the posterior mediastinum. So moving to the first one, which is the anterior mediastinum. The anterior mediastinum is a part of the inferior mediastinum. And so how is it bounded? It is bounded anteriorly by the body of the sternum. Don't forget, by the body of the sternum anteriorly. Posteriorly, it is bounded by the middle mediastinum, which contains the pericardium of the heart. So anteriorly is the body of the sternum. Posteriorly is the middle mediastinum, which contains the pericardiac sac or the pericardium covering the heart. Superiorly, it is bounded by the transverse thoracic line. Don't forget. And inferiorly is bounded by the diaphragm. Inferiorly by the diaphragm. Also by the side, don't forget. Always, all of them by the side, they are all bounded by the mediastinal pleura, which is the extension of the pleura of the lungs. Don't forget. So what is the content of the anterior mediastinum? The anterior mediastinum contains the loose areolar tissue. Don't forget, the loose areolar tissue. The superior and inferior sternopericardial ligament, which is stretching between the sternum and the pericardium. Don't forget. First one is the loose areolar tissue. Second one is the sternopericardial ligament, joining the sternum to the pericardium of the heart. Now you also have 3 to 4 lymph nodes. You have 3 to 4 lymph nodes. You also have the mediastinal branch of the internal thoracic artery. Don't forget, we discussed in the breast about the internal thoracic artery, which is also called the mammillary artery. And the last one you can see here, in children, the thymus is dropping in the anterior mediastinum. The lower part of the thymus is dropping in the anterior mediastinum. And one clinical effect you can see in the mediastinum, very important here, is that infection from the neck can spread from the superior mediastinum to the anterior mediastinum, because the anterior mediastinum is a very small space, and due to a continuous version from the superior mediastinum, infection can easily spread from the pretracheal fascia to the anterior mediastinum. The next is the middle mediastinum. Don't forget the middle mediastinum. We have talked about the anterior mediastinum, we have talked about the inferior mediastinum, we have talked about the superior mediastinum. So the middle mediastinum is bounded anteriorly by the anterior mediastinum, is bounded posteriorly by the posterior mediastinum, is bounded superiorly by the superior mediastinum, separated by the transverse thoracic line, and is bounded inferiorly by the diaphragm, covering the inferior thoracic aperture or inferior thoracic outlet. So what are the content of this middle mediastinum? So the middle mediastinum contains basically the heart covered by the pericardium. So the heart covered by the pericardium. So you also have some arteries there. So what arteries can you see there? The first one is the ascending aorta. You can find the ascending aorta there. You can find the pulmonary trunk dividing into the 2 pulmonary arteries. First one, the ascending aorta. The pulmonary trunk dividing into the 2 pulmonary arteries. You can find the pericardiophrenic artery there. So the ascending aorta, the pulmonary trunk, and you can find the pericardiophrenic artery. So what are the veins you can find there? The first vein you can find is the lower half of the superior vena cava, the terminal part of the azygos vein, and you can find finally the pulmonary vein, both the right and the left pulmonary vein. So the first one is the lower half of the superior vena cava, the terminal part of the azygos vein, and you can find the pulmonary vein on the right and the left hand side. Now, what are the nerves you can find in this middle mediastinum? You can find the phrenic nerve, and the last one is the deep what cardiac plexus. So you can find the phrenic nerve and the deep cardiac what plexus. So what is the lymph nodes? What lymph nodes can you find there? Because in the anterior mediastinum you can find 3 to 4 lymph nodes. So what lymph node can you find in the middle mediastinum? You can find what we call the tracheobronchial lymph node. The tracheobronchial what lymph node, draining the what the trachea and the what the bronchus. So lastly, you can find tubes. So what tubes can you find here? The first one is the bifurcation of the trachea. The trachea bifurcates here. So always know that the trachea bifurcates at the what the angle of Lewis into the right and left what principal what bronchi. And the last one, after you have the bifurcation of the trachea, is divided into right and left principal what bronchi. So lastly, we're talking about the posterior mediastinum. We have talked about all the division of the inferior mediastinum, which is the anterior mediastinum, middle mediastinum. So we'll be talking about the posterior mediastinum. So the posterior mediastinum is bounded posteriorly by the what from T5 below, which is T5, T6 below, or we call it the lower 8 what bodies of the thoracic vertebrate and their intervening intervertebral discs, lower 8, which is from T6 below. The anteriorly it is bounded by the middle mediastinum, or the content of the middle mediastinum, which is the what the pericardium covering the heart, the bifurcation of the trachea and the pulmonary vessels anteriorly, while posterior is the lower 8 thoracic vertebrate starting from T5 below. Superiorly it is bounded by the what the transverse thoracic line, the transverse thoracic line, or you can call it transverse thoracic plane. Now the transverse thoracic plane, we have always said, is coming from the what angle of Lewis, which is the mandibulosternal joint, to the intervertebral disc between T4 and T5. So it's bounding the posterior mediastinum superiorly. So inferiorly, what is bounding it inferiorly? The inferiorly is bounded by the what the diaphragm. So the diaphragm, like I said, is separating the thoracic cavity from the what abdominal cavity, and it's also closing the what inferior thoracic what outlet. So now the next one is the content of the posterior mediastinum. So what are the content of the posterior mediastinum? The first one is the esophagus. The esophagus. Next one is the thoracic duct. Then we have next one is the descending thoracic what aorta. The descending thoracic aorta and their branches. Now the next one here is the azygos, the hemiazygos, and the accessory hemiazygos what vein. So you have the azygos, you have the hemiazygos, and you have the accessory hemiazygos vein. So you also have the vagus nerve here. You also have the vagus nerve in this place. You also have the sympathetic trunk and the splanchnic what nerve. And lastly, you have the posterior mediastinal lymph nodes. So don't forget, we have the esophagus, we have the thoracic duct, we have the descending aorta and its branches, we have the azygos, hemiazygos, and accessory hemiazygos vein. You have the vagus nerve, you have the sympathetic trunk, and also splanchnic what nerves, and the last one you have the posterior mediastinal what lymph nodes. Don't forget, this is the posterior mediastinum. So next is the clinical relevance or the applied anatomy. That is the next one I'll be talking now. First one, in the clinical relevance, we're talking about mediastinitis. So what is mediastinitis? Mediastinitis is when there's inflammation to the loose areolar tissue in the what in the mediastinum. And sometimes this inflammation can begin from the neck, can begin from the spaces in the neck, which we call the facial spaces, which is the pretracheal fascia and the retropharyngeal fascia. So this fascia contains what we call lymph nodes or loose connective tissues that can be inflamed and transported to the what mediastinum, which can be in the superior or in the what anterior what mediastinum. So the next one is the what mediastinal syndrome. In mediastinal syndrome is when there is compression by any growth. It can be a tumor or a cyst, which can give rise to what so many signs and symptoms. And these signs and symptoms can be collectively called mediastinal what syndrome. The most common mediastinal syndrome are due to what bronchogenic carcinoma, aneurysm of the what the aorta, and enlargement of the mediastinal lymph node, usually seen in what Hodgkin's what lymphoma, or maybe various Hodgkin groups of the what diseases. Don't forget. So when the mediastinum is compressed by either a tumor or a cyst, it can give a host of signs and symptoms, which you call collectively mediastinal what syndrome. And this mediastinal syndrome can be caused due to what bronchogenic or carcinoma, aneurysm of the aorta, enlargement of the what mediastinal lymph nodes, which is seen in what Hodgkin's what disease. Now, what are the clinical signs seen in what mediastinal syndrome? The first one is dyspnea. What is dyspnea? The patient will have difficulty in breathing due to compression of the what the trachea. You have dysphagia, because why we have dysphagia? You have difficulty in swallowing due to compression of the esophagus. You have dyspnea. which will give you hoarseness of your voice due to compression of the left recurrent laryngeal nerve, which you see in the superior mediastinum. Now you also have engorgement of the vein, because don't forget, the upper half of the body, which is the upper half of the SBC, can be obstructed in this case, which is seen in the superior mediastinum. And lastly, there will be erosion of the body of the thoracic vertebrae due to compression of the thoracic vertebrae. So the body of the thoracic vertebrae will be eroded, which is very, very bad. So I hope it all made sense and you have understood everything I've talked about in the mediastinum, beginning from this. It is the central compartment of the thoracic cavity in between the pleural cavity, and it contains great vessels, it contains organs, important organs, and the division, which is superior and inferior, divided by the transverse thoracic line, and the inferior dividing into anterior, middle, and posterior, and the contents. I hope you understood. Now you can repeat the video over and over again and listen to what I said and the peculiarities, which will be very, very important for your exams. Don't forget it. Always continue reading, continue watching my video, and if you are new to my channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on your post notification button, so that anytime I drop any video, you'll be sure to be notified. And if you want me to make a video for you, just drop it down in the comment section. I promise to make that video for you. So I'll see you in my next video. Keep watching, keep liking, and keep sharing. Bye bye.